Hi everyone. My name's Emily Gans, and today I'll be presenting my project about how sex does not equal gender. And this presentation will explore how sex and gender are different concepts and how researchers like Judith Lorber, Judith Butler, and more help us understand gender as something socially constructed and performed. I'll also make sure to integrate perspectives from neuroscience, psychology, and physiology to challenge the sex and gender binary. So, what's the difference? To start, it's important to clarify what we mean by sex and what we mean by gender. Sex generally refers to biological attributes like chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. While gender, on the other hand, refers to roles, behaviors, and identities that society considers appropriate for men, women, or other genders. Although these are often treated as interchangeable, they're actually very different concepts. And throughout this presentation, I'll show how gender is shaped more by society than biology. For the social construction of gender, Judith Lorber argues that gender is a social institution, meaning that it organizes our lives even when we don't notice it. One quote that stood out to me is when Judith Lorber said that gender is so pervasive that in our society we assume it is bred into our genes. Lorber also makes a really good point when she says that gender is something that we do and we do it consistently through our clothes, behaviors, speech, and even more. She emphasizes that gender isn't natural, but something that we learn and something that we perform over time, starting as early as birth. And this makes gender a product of socialization and not just biology. Now this is someone named Judith Butler, and building on Lorber, Butler takes the idea further in her work called Performative Acts and Gender Constitution, and she argues that gender is not who we are, but more so what we do and what we do repeatedly, specifically. And through our everyday actions, how we talk, dress, and move is how we perform gender. And these performances reinforce the illusion of stable gender identity. And like Lorber, Butler rejects the idea that gender is fixed or biologically determined. Instead, gender is always being created and recreated through our behavior. This is a video summary of a SciShow video that I found. SciShow is the channel on YouTube. Um, and this really short video is titled Sex and Gender, What's the Difference? And I think that personally it does a great job of explaining the distinction. It highlights that gender includes social roles, cultural norms, and personal identity, whereas sex is about anatomy and chromosomes. And this video also touches on how people are often forced into binary categories. And what I mean by that is male or female. And they do this based on people's bodies, even when that doesn't reflect how they identify. And this reinforces the need to separate the ideas of sex and gender. This is a neuroscience perspective, and in my opinion, this was a really fascinating study created by someone named Joel in 2011. And this perspective like examined over 1,400 brain scans and found that brains do not fall into two distinct categories, male or female. And instead, most people have what he described as a mosaic of characteristics, traditionally linked to both sexes. And this challenges the idea that there is such a thing as a male brain or female brain. And it supports the idea that behavior, cognition, and identity cannot be neatly mapped onto biological sex. This is the physiological perspective, and here I talk about an article by Karkazis, sorry about that, Karkazis in 2012, and they critique how sports organizations use testosterone levels to determine who qualifies as a female in competition. And this author argues um, that this reflects outdated gendered ideas about biology, and they show how policies intended to regulate sex actually enforces gender norms, assuming that high testosterone automatically equals male performance. And this reveals how biology is often used inappropriately to uphold gender binaries, even when science shows some more complex stuff. And this is the psychological perspective. And here, I use the work of someone named Hyde. And Hyde argues for moving beyond binary thinking in psychology. And they stress that focusing only on male and female limits, I meant male and female limits our understanding of identity and behavior. And their research emphasizes the need to include non-binary, transgender, and culturally diverse experiences in psychological research. And they call for a more intersectional approach that sees gender as fluid and context dependent and not so much fixed or universal. This is the cross-cultural and evolutionary perspective, and someone named Cordelia Fine in 1993 critiques evolutionary psychology's tendency to explain gender roles as biologically inevitable. And she argues that many of these claims ignore how culture actually shapes behavior. And for example, traits like maybe you say aggression or nurturing are often explained as evolutionary, but they're also heavily influenced by societal expectations. And her work supports the idea that gender roles are constructed, not hardwired. So why is this important to me? It matters because understanding that sex and gender has real-world consequences. It affects how we design policies, healthcare systems, and educational programs, and it influences how we treat other people that are identify as transgender and non-binary, and how inclusive our society is. So by breaking away from the binary model, we can better support gender diversity and move toward equity and respect for all identities. So to sum it all up, Judith Lorber, Judith Butler, Cordelia Fine, and all the other things that I used in the presentation, they all help us see gender as a social practice and not some kind of biological like destiny. Um, Neuroscience, psychology, physiology, and cross-cultural research all challenge the idea that sex and gender are not the same. Together, this body of work shows us that gender is fluid, performative, and constructed through society. And by embracing this complexity, we can all better understand human diversity and promote social change. And these are all my references, which I will also include in the um, discussion description. And yeah, thank you guys.